Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, these are exceptionally crazy times. The dog days of summer are here. The political fights are hot. And I am very happy and thrilled to have on this program a man I've known for a long time, a guy I've been eager to have join us on this show, a rising star in media and politics, and a Lord Jeff, now a mammoth. We'll talk about that and more. The great and powerful Buck Sexton joins us on Independent Americans. Welcome, Buck.
Thanks so much, Paul. Appreciate you having me.
So we've known each other for a while, right? I mean, you went to Amherst a couple years after I left, right?
Yes, sir.
And so we met in weird places, like we'd meet in the green room at Fox and places like that along the way where you don't see too many Amherst guys, right?
Yeah, back in the day when CNN actually used to have conservatives on before they had the great purge under the Zucker administration.
Yeah, I mean you've been around, and I want to talk about that and get your perspective on the media,
Sure.
And all the things happening with Trump, national security. Given your CIA background, that's always a focus for us, and I think you can add some value there. But let's start with the question I ask of everyone: where are you, and how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm New York City based. I was born and raised here, so kind of stuck close to home, I guess. Other than the CIA years, this has really been home base for me. Doing the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. So that's the official replacement program for the Rush Limbaugh show. So we're very fortunate. I mean, we got catapulted onto over 400 radio stations every day from noon to 3 Eastern. And then there's the Buck Sexton show podcast that I do, which is about 20 minutes just on my own, kind of a quick run through things every day. And I've been doing a show for the First TV, which is a startup, kind of like all these digital TV startups these days, and Fox News hits here and there. People see me, so that's what I'm up to. And I just got engaged.
I was going to congratulate you. I was waiting for you to get to that part. Congratulations!
And I got to get married. People, I had relatives who were like, "You're 40. It's going to start getting weird here if you don't lock it down soon." So I was like, "All right." So I got engaged, and yeah, man, hoping to do the whole husband's dad thing in the next couple of years too. So following in your footsteps there.
There's nothing I recommend more highly than that. I didn't get married till I was 41, first kid at 42, second kid at 45. So my recommendation is get in shape, man. Get in shape, because there's nothing more physically demanding.
I've been working out more consistently the last 6 months than at any time since I left the agency. And I feel like I only worked out a lot there because they actually paid us to work out. Not like you guys with PT where it's mandatory, but you were allowed to go and work out for an hour a day. But yeah, no, I've seen this. My sister just had a kid, and her forearm and like bicep strength is incredible because he's a little toddler now.
And the injuries you'll get. I got hurt jumping on a slip and slide yesterday. Definitely an old man injury, and just picking up things.
I thought they discontinued those things because so many people were dislocating their shoulders.
Man, now they're improved. They're wider, they're longer, they're supercharged. I mean, I can attest that they go faster than they ever did. It's better than when we had a long sheet of plastic that my dad used to get from his job and we did a fire hose. But let's transition from that. Media is a fire hose right now. You mentioned it, and I wanted to start there to kind of paint the picture. Your role in the media is powerful, right? You're, I think number 3 in the country. Your show in talk radio. You've inherited this time slot from Rush Limbaugh. I grew up in New York, listening to Rush Limbaugh.
You mean audience size on radio?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Number one.
Are you guys ahead of Hannity now?
Okay. Maybe Hannity's number 1, we're number 2, but it's very
right.
close. It's very.
What I saw was like almost 10 million
power rankings. Yeah, that's not necessarily. That's kind of there's somewhat subjective in that. But look, I mean, Sean is an institution, so clearly he's got a massive audience. But well, you know what? We'll take number 2. We'll take number 2.
Yeah. But my bigger point is you're a powerhouse. You and Clay have inherited maybe the most coveted spot in talk radio, coming in behind Rush. I remember growing up as a kid, and my neighbor, his dad worked at the post office and did job. He always had Rush on. There was an entire generation of guys in my neighborhood, and I grew up that just had Rush on constantly. And I don't think many of them even considered themselves Republicans. I think there was a populism to it, an independence to it, talked about conservative values and things like that. But I want to ask you, can you explain, let's say somebody is coming in from Mars and they know nothing about talk radio and your role in the media landscape. Who do you talk to? who is your audience? If you went deeper into that 10 million people, and I'm sure advertisers and others have, but can you paint the picture for us? Who is the audience you talk for and with on a daily basis?
Yeah, sure. I mean, our audience. But first off, I think it's so interesting because Rush built this incredible machine of over 600 radio stations, and there were really a few decades, well, let's say a couple of decades, where if you were center right in any capacity, so including populist conservatives, including people that maybe are right leaning independents, there were only a few institutions in the media that really moved the needle in a massive way. Fox News as a general entity, Rush Limbaugh as an individual entity, and then you could say maybe a combination of all the other talk radio and internet websites and all that. So I would say that would be the breakdown starting around the late 90s going into the 2000s. The landscape has changed a lot. So as everyone knows, but specifically for conservative media, there are massive podcasters now, right? I mean, podcasts, I remember when I was doing a podcast and it was like a hobbyist thing while I was doing radio. And so I started on digital streaming radio, which is just now people just think it's streaming audio, right? But we called it streaming radio at the time in like 2012, I think it was. So about a decade ago. And that was considered very new. And now, I mean, obviously Rogan and Carolla's had a huge audience in the game for a long time. There are these guys who have built these massive podcast audiences. So, and then when you add social media following into that, no one's ever going to replicate the influence as a solo individual show that Rush Limbaugh had from, let's say the late 80s into when Rush passed. It's just not possible. A lot of people would say just because, a unique talent, which is obviously true in a sense, but also, man, it's such a different space. There are so many ways that people consume content and ways that people are getting their information. So if you were center right, it used to be before Drudge and Fox, it was Rush and some other talk show hosts, really, right? That was it. Maybe National Review and some more scholarly journals of opinion.
Right.
But now, man, it's I mean, like, the Daily Wire is huge podcast.
So do you see Buck, is there kind of a bifurcation where you've got old school terrestrial radio listeners, right? People who are in the car a lot, generally older white men, people who listen to WABC, maybe back when the Yankees were on there, right? And then you've got this new podcasting world that's Shapiro and Bongino and people that maybe didn't start on terrestrial radio, but are coming to you in different ways. And then obviously there's a fired up base that's on social media that's seeing you on Fox. Is it kind of a couple of different audiences in one that you're reaching?
For sure. I mean, it's multi-platform. I mean, even some of those names you just mentioned, those are guys who have done radio at a big level. They've got a huge podcast. They've got massive social followings. They do TV. I think now, it used to be, I think if you wanted to, in a more general news media and commentary space, but particularly if you're just in news media, you wanted the anchor chair at CBS Evening News, right? I mean, there's just very few things that were going to compete with that.
Yeah. I
mean, now there's tons of things in terms of influence and reach that I would say even supersede a role like that. Yeah. And that's been the case for some time. So
there's money and editorial freedom, right? I mean, many of you guys are running your own show, right? You can control your advertisers. Absolutely. You don't have to answer to an editorial person in your ear telling you what to cover or what not to cover. So there's a ton of freedom. I mean, you see somebody like Chris Cuomo now who's reemerging. He can do a lot different things than he used to do at CNN under that kind of banner, right? So I want to ask you to, maybe kind of be a voice for your audience, right? Like, as an independent, there's almost no space for us, right? You've got like the Smirkaniches, and some might argue Cuomo's or Rogan's, or even, back to the days of Imus and folks like that. But the middle is kind of gone. So you're often on Fox and on other places, kind of channeling your audience. So let me ask you this: with the news,
I didn't answer your question here. Sorry. I didn't mean to jump in. You said like, who is my audience?
Yeah.
And we have pretty good demographic data on this. It's about 60-40 male, female. Now I'm speaking about radio specifically. But but that's my main thing. The radio is the flagship of what I do. It's about 60-40 male female, which is actually a really high female proportion. Clay and I like to say it's because we have great hair, but I don't, we don't really, I think maybe we're more accessible, or Clay brings obviously a big sports component into it as well.
Right.
But so we're, it's a pretty solid split. We have a larger female audience than is the tendency in talk radio is usually 80% male.
Right.
Something like that. And in our audience is, it's really just a cross section of working America. I mean, depending on because we're on coast to coast, we're on across the whole, all 50 states. We got guys in Alaska, guys in Florida, gals in California, New York. So yeah, I mean, that's, and obviously right of center, but we have a fair number of independents, and even we love this because they call in. We even have Democrats who I wouldn't say hate listen, but curiosity listen.
I think that was always, the under quantified part of Rush's audience, right? Was like how many people call or listen to study or to hate or to pick fights or whatever they're doing, right? But that it's hard to quantify that percentage of the audience. But safe to say you're reaching one of the biggest audiences in the country. And part of what I want to have in this conversation is to help you. To give you an opportunity to kind of channel maybe what's coming next, because we're having this conversation, it'll drop, roughly a week after the warrant was delivered at Mar-a-Lago. The country is deeply divided. You have a national security background in the CIA and working for the NYPD. So I want to kind of point to that piece in particular. Can you give me a sense of what do you think the reaction is going to be? I mean, over the next couple of weeks, you talk to this audience on a regular basis and on a threat level, right? Because some folks are saying civil war, some folks are saying protest, some folks are saying we don't accept the election. From a national security standpoint, and given your expertise, what do you think the action and activism and political activity looks like in the next couple of weeks after this whatever we're going to call it, raid, warrant delivery, incident at Mar-a-Lago?
So I tend to, and this maybe is a holdover from my CIA days, writing very tightly worded papers. You were going around kicking in doors, actually fighting for America. I was making lattes and writing very astute memos about foreign policy. Although I went to Iraq and Afghanistan and some other spots too, but I never really did.
You did your time. You did your part.
I never did anything that exciting.
You did your part.
But I tried. That was honestly one of the CIA, because I was like, well, I think I'll be better at helping the war fighter by being a sneaky guy who outthinks the enemy. Kind of, that was just I was a college kid. I had no background in anything.
Sidebar, you were also at Amherst, which has a long history of feeding people into the CIA. And I think 3 past directors of the CIA were Amherst graduates. So that was, it's not like you just came out of left field. I mean, you were coming out of a place where the CIA recruited smart guys like you and gals like us to go do that kind of work. That is true.
And there's more CIA directors from Amherst College than any school, with the I think the only one that lines up, I think Naval Academy.
Maybe the Naval Academy. Yeah, I was going to say one of the academies.
But anyway, so what's going to happen with but back to why I was bringing up the memo writing at the agency back at Langley. If you took the less exciting storyline as your thesis, you were right 9 out of 10 times. So I find, is China going to invade Taiwan? Guess what? Every person who said China's about to, China is invading Taiwan has been wrong so far. Every person who said, no, it's saber rattling. So I tend to approach things from that context. So here's what I think you're going to find out about the raid, or the depending on, I know you've got people on both sides in your audience. So the entirely by the book, judicially sanctioned, professional removal of documents from Mar-a-Lago, whatever, right?
Yeah. We can call it the Mar-a-Lago thing for the sake of conversation. Let's call it the Mar-a-Lago thing. Okay.
I think that they're going to find out that it really was just about, it was about documents. And I think that the way that they have breathed, so it's kind of a couple of moving pieces at the same time. One thing is that the people who really despise Trump to the point where I think they are not objective. And I'm not even saying there are things that they hate about Trump that aren't true. I'm a Trump supporter in terms of the policies, but I understand there are things about him as an individual or as that really drive people a little crazy. but it drives them so crazy that I think they often have the opposite effect of what they intend, meaning instead of keeping their cool and making the case, or instead they're like, we're pulling off the guardrails, anything to stop Trump. I mean, you saw this with journalists. They said this out loud. We're not objective storytellers anymore. We're, the truth means anti-Trump is essentially the line when he was in office. So what that means for Mar-a-Lago is I think that this will look like a pretty massive blunder on their part, and as objectively as it can be. And again, the thing is, I always tell people where I come from. Like, I like Trump, I support Trump, and I think that a lot of this, the stuff that's been done against him up to this point is really bad for the country. I also think January 6th was really bad for the country, and I've been very critical of that and the president on that day. But that doesn't mean that I don't support what Donald Trump did in office for the most part. Anyway,
so can we build off of that, because I think that's the
sure.
important point, right? Is not just the what, but sometimes the what doesn't matter, right? The what's next is what I want to get to, right? So knowing this audience as you do, seeing how they view the media, seeing how it's going to be played on both sides, we can predict the play, right? And if you say they're, usually wrong 9 out of 10 times, maybe it's 8 out of 10 times, and those 2 times are January 6th and the invasion of Ukraine, right? And those, so
yes.
They're big. So how intense, how violent, how disruptive. You've got people openly calling for civil war, right? And you're in a place on both sides, and you're in a place where you can guide that tone. That's part of why I really wanted to talk to you, and I hope you'll come back, because you can influence people profoundly in how they view this, but also how they think about what to do about it.
Yeah, I mean,
so what do you see coming out of what people are going to do about it?
I think it's going to be political and not violent. That is my honest assessment of where this is likely to go, which is a good thing. I mean, obviously, that's my big preference. I think the politics, and what I was trying to allude to before a little bit, is that they'll be somewhat different from what the people that instigated the action at Mar-a-Lago anticipated, because I think they viewed it, meaning the people at DOJ, Merrick Garland, as, the law is the law, and like Trump's not above the law, and this is where we're going to show everybody. To everybody who ever cast a vote for Donald Trump, this is a continuation of the weaponization of the deep state and the persecution. And so there's a rallying around the flag, or if you will, a rallying around the Trump effect here, that's really going to be, I think, pretty strong, because there's no smoking gun in the documents that they were looking for in the basement. Should Trump have given the documents? Probably, but there's nothing of consequence. And the much bigger issue here is you've ordered an FBI, even if you want to call it an FBI search, you're going to the home of the most recent president, who's also a likely presidential candidate. The optics of this are horrible. I mean, the threshold for this, and I'm speaking about this as objectively as I can, given my perspective, but the threshold for this should be and there are people who Andrew Cuomo came out and said the threshold for this needs to be really high.
Yeah. Well, I
don't think we're going to meet that threshold at all. And I think that'll be pretty obvious. And you're going to have a lot of people say, well, the law is the law. I'm like, that's not going to be enough. I don't think there's going to be, riots in the streets. And, I think that January 6th, which it wasn't like the whole country and every Republican I know is saying, we need to do this crazy thing in the camp. This was a group that gathered together, and it was actually a much larger group, and then a faction of it broke off. And as soon as it happened, as soon as we saw what was going on TV, every conservative that I know and am friends with and respect was like, this is not only wrong, which it was, but also a blunder. Is it the Talleyrand line? It was worse than a mistake. It was a blunder, right? Or
right. So I think that's where, that's what I think is most interesting to talk about, rather than, punching back and forth on conservative and liberal media. Like, okay, we can kind of shake out how it may or may not go down. And in some ways, the truth doesn't matter, but there's kind of a political flashpoint, right? Like, Democrats will see this as a rally cry. Trump supporters will see this as a rally cry. And then it goes towards something else. And I think what I want to get from you, Buck, is I assume Trump's going to run again, right? I assume he's going to announce. He's waiting for his timing. Do you think he will announce? And this could actually propel his candidacy. It could propel his base. How big that base is, what it manifests into, we'll see. But practically speaking, do you think he's going to run? When do you think he's going to announce? And are you going to support him?
I think it's yes across the board to everything that you've said. If I can remember all the points made, yes, he's going to run. Yes, the base will rally around him. Yes, I will support him. I am also very favorable, and I'm very open about this, to Governor Ron DeSantis as a possible candidate. I think more than any other governor or politician I can remember, I think that he earned at least my vote as a New Yorker who could flee to Florida during the madness of the lockdowns, which were wrong on every level, should never have happened. And this is, I do think, that's another place where I need my independents to start being a little louder about that one. Because I was anti-lockdowns and anti-masks and on the record with that stuff when Trump was president. I was like, this is a mistake. This is wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. Look at the data. Look what we know. And I think when people went into their political bunkers over that thing, it just got, we can't do that. When it comes to something like a pandemic, you can't have people saying, well, blue team says this and red team says that. Anyway,
I don't think anything's driven more independents away from the Democratic Party than the mask stuff, right? The COVID response, the masking. Me and others have been vocal about it. I got 2 little kids. I got a 3-year-old who was going to preschool with a mask. I get it, and I think that has driven people away. But also, as someone who understands this evolution of the GOP, it also seems like independents are leaving the GOP in huge numbers too because of Trump, right? And it's that, I think that seems to be playing out, while at the same time Trump-backed governors are winning, right? So fall is looking like this clash between Democrats who are getting party support and Republican candidates who are not getting party support but are getting Trump support. So you got this kind of pre-clash this November. And I want to ask you, what does that mean for independents? I would argue, as an independent, if someone talks independents, you guys are losing us. I say the same thing to the Democrats. I said it to Pete Buttigieg. I say it to John Tester. You guys are losing us too. Where do you think those independents realistically go? Because they're not going to go to Trump. They're not going to go to Biden or Kamala Harris. So this is independent Americans. Where do you think they're going to go, Buck?
Can you, the next time you speak to Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg, because he's not going to talk to me, can you just ask him, hey, the airlines are in the worst shape they've been in since, let's say the last 20 years. They're falling apart on your watch. We have a baby formula shortage and we have supply chain issues.
I think there's a lot of people you can beat up on. I wouldn't pick Buttigieg as my first because I think, indisputably, he's one of the smarter people and more competent people in the Democratic Party. And if I'm you might not get any better than Buttigieg, right?
But I don't want to.
And I'll put in a good word. I'll ask him. I'll tell him to come on your show.
I'm not just trying to throw a pie here. I just want to know. So whose fault is it?
Look, we could talk infrastructure all day. I think it's America's, one of America's greatest failures of our time. I think it's similar to the way, the VA has been handled. I think there are plenty of things that have been inherited by multiple administrations and multiple parties. And the bottom line for me is I'm practical. My roads still fucking suck, right? Port Authority is still a disaster. LaGuardia is still an armpit, right? Like those things haven't changed, and I blame all of them. And that's why I'm an independent, because you're not going to convince me that Republicans are going to be any better or Democrats are going to be any better. So maybe that's another way of asking it. Like you're battling for hearts and minds, right? As a former CIA guy and now as a talk show host, where do you think they're really going to go? Are they going to go to Adam Kinzinger? They're not going to go to Andrew Yang.
So here's
where
what
do you think they're going to go?
Because I think the transportation thing is actually maybe a good entry point for this. Yeah. Meaning the Secretary, Buttigieg. The mainstream Democrat Party, and for the people in your audience who are, and by the way, this is great. I love being able, because probably I would say 10% of my audience, maybe 15 are independents and 5% are Democrats. So I really don't get to talk to them very much. So I really do relish the opportunity. The mainstream Democrat Party has been, I argue and truly believe, indisputably wrong on crime policies nationwide across the country. Indisputably wrong on the border and the function of things like the Remain in Mexico policy and other measures that you either want illegal immigration or you don't. And if you want it, they're doing great things. If you want to limit it or stop it altogether, there couldn't be more wrong. Inflation, I would argue they're a little bit more reckless on, but Republicans, Trump spent too much money too. So there's some areas where it's just too clear. I mean, it's too clear to me. And then COVID, I think the Democrat Party is just completely out of its mind on COVID, turned it into a weird religion. I think Fauci is one of the worst people to have ever had any kind of bureaucratic role in the United States government, maybe the worst. I think he's a liar. I think he's deeply
ever like in the history of America. Come on, you're an Amherst. Were you a history grad at Amherst? Ever? Fauci is okay. In your lifetime,
I see.
Okay,
you know how some people react to Trump and they're just like, he's worse than Stalin. It's like Stalin killed 20 million people. I mean, I have a little bit of Fauci derangement syndrome insofar as I just think that, and it's not him personally. I don't know him. I've interviewed him a couple of times before he knew who I was. But that whole mentality of locking people away in their homes and trying to keep them safe from a virus and failing massively and then continuing to do it. Anyway,
I got to be mindful of your time because you got to go talk to 10 million people in a couple of minutes here. Where do they go, Buck?
I'm gonna tell radio. Give me 1 second. I'm telling radio right now. I'm gonna be a little closer to the wire here.
All right, I promised I'd get you out of here in time, and I don't want to miss that mark.
We got 10:45 my time. I got to bounce. Okay. I'm telling right now.
You got it. We can
just
keep
getting going here.
Yeah. But I think I really want to drill down on this because I think you're unapologetically recruiting for your team, right? Buttigieg is out there recruiting for his team, and I'm recruiting for mine. And my team is very small. We've had Admiral Stavridis on, we've had a lot of other folks on that feel politically homeless. And I think you guys are losing us, and I think that the Democrats are losing us. And now you got, I think, some kind of political opportunists like Andrew Yang and others who think they're going to be the savior. And his assessment is correct that independents have power and are disenfranchised and present an opportunity, but his prescription is wrong. We don't want King Andrew Yang any more than we wanted Bloomberg or Steve Forbes or others. So I'm asking you to put that CIA analyst hat on, big Amherst brain. Where are they going to go, Buck? Where are they really going to go?
So here's the thing. I really do believe that there is the branding exercise of American politics has really broken down into Trump and anti-Trump, or let's say the Democrat Party, sort of the big blue machine versus Trump. And there's a lot of other stuff and a lot of other people that really do matter. And in some cases, and this is one thing from the pandemic that I'll say was at least a helpful reminder in some ways, was that your governor matters, your mayor matters, the state legislature matters. And it was also a time when I think people were able to see that this wasn't some theoretical about taxes or even a lot of foreign policy stuff. As you and I know, people sit around, they're like, oh, but if we don't show strength on the world stage, I mean, really, I'm swirling my latte as I say it, like, give me a break. But on things like shutting down your bar that you own or your retail location or whatever, where you work, or you're a franchisee, that can bankrupt you or it can really throw your life off. Right. And so the decisions made at the state level, and I'm trying to back into your thing about independence, I think people see that there are results that come from what people do that are supposed to represent you. And increasingly, I would hope that people can see that they need to make decisions based on those results and not the branding of this team or that team makes me feel a certain way. Now, I would argue that on a whole range of issues, based on the results, people should overwhelmingly feel that the Republican Party is their home. But I would also say that focus on results needs to stay. And there are some places where, there are clear deficiencies or have been deficiencies on my side that I would want to see addressed. I mean, overspending, giving into Fauci, and a lot of things. Even
it's kind of like being a Dodgers fan and watching the Red Sox or the Yankees play. You kind of want them both to lose, and you can't, right? Like they're gonna be there. You're gonna have to watch it, and you're gonna have to sit through it. But this is also happening in a time where maybe a lot of Dodger fans are supporting whoever won the World Series last, and there was momentum for Trump at many points. There's been momentum for Democrats at other points. it feels like at the national level, the Democrats have put together a string, right? They passed more legislation in the last few weeks than I think most of us would have expected, and significant legislation, whether or not anyone hears it, whether or not they get any credit for it, they're putting points on the board, right? And then on the other side of things, Trump's now got new energy after this Mar-a-Lago incident. He's winning in governorships, across the country. Every Tuesday, it's another one. I think Wisconsin yesterday, right? So they're going to meet in the middle and they're going to clash. And a lot of us who are independents, I don't say in the middle, but who say none of the above, we're basically middle finger to all of them, pox on everybody's houses because you're failing us on that practical level. I don't think they're going to go to either side. And so it might be who's got the momentum at that moment when the election happens, who isn't indicted, who isn't dead, right? Like if Trump and Biden are the candidates, their health and their age, the likelihood of both of them being healthy by the time we get to 2024 is pretty low. So there's all these variables where Kamala Harris could come in or DeSantis could come in. And at the end of the day, we're not going to be happy with any of it.
Right. And so this goes to, there's the of course, there's the midterm and how that is going to play out based upon the trends, the momentum, everything you're talking about right now. But it's you do it, I do it too, even on radio. Or we all immediately go to the 2024 presidential election, the whole big thing all at once. I think the midterms are going to be very difficult for Democrats, and should be, because I think that even if you look at on a best case basis, they ended up, they brought this bill up. And I just had recently a show where I said, wake up time, guys. We're not going to take the Senate under the current, Republicans are not going to take the Senate unless they have a number of candidates. We can have all we can preach to the choir on the right as much as we want about how crappy Democrats are. Again, I believe that, but we're not going to win unless we get your audience, people like your audience who are persuadable, right?
Right.
See, this thing, I like the opportunity. I don't get it that much in the media. Sit down with someone and be like, what matters to you? What do you care about? I mean, all the polling shows, economy, inflation, the border, and then it kind of.
And a lot of us who are independents, national security. And that's never in the top ranking, but we vote on it and we care about it and we track on it, right? Like I think Biden's smart to trumpet the PACT Act for veterans that's going to get signed at the White House. They know that's populist, right? That's politically popular. But the national security piece is always like the knuckleball, right? And it's always floating around out there because Ukraine can happen. Domestic extremism can happen, right? And I think that's a part that's underappreciated. And when you've got Trump and Biden, you don't have, Admiral Stavridis, you don't have Admiral Mike Mullen or Petraeus or Keene or whoever you want to pick. They feel like they're uniquely up for grabs for someone like a Kinzinger. It's not going to be Kinzinger. But if Admiral Stavridis decides to run as an independent or someone like that, there seems to be a unique opportunity to capture that group. I mean, don't you think?
Kinzinger's the challenge for someone like Kinzinger is that when you get elected running on the right and then you are viewed. And again, this is the broad perception that anybody else, I think, who is on the right, as I am, I don't pretend to be in the center. They view him as essentially a political turncoat.
Right.
So he's never going to have any real resonance on the right anymore. He's obviously not going to be keeping his job. So that to me doesn't really, you have to sort of start from a place of being in the center, given our party system, in order to continue. You basically either are there and that's where you are, or you're always going to be considered playing for the other team, even if you think you're in the center.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who are changing jerseys, who didn't come up in the farm team. And I think that's what we've seen on this show. We've tried to highlight is the people who are legitimately unaffiliated and independent, not Democrats or Republicans who changed their jersey for this season. But I think there's a new generation of people who are born independent, stayed independent. Their spirit animal is not Andrew Yang, it's George Washington, who said he didn't want parties at all. And I think what we're looking at in the fall is who shows up. Right? Are more Trump supporters going to show up than people who are upset about Roe? Are independents going to show up at all? Is there going to be a Liz Cheney, Kinzinger middle that's able to coalesce any significant number of people? It doesn't look like it. I think the real question for November, especially in a midterm, is turnout, right? And it's going to be who actually comes out and votes on likely one or two issues, right?
Well, see, I think it's interesting because there's going to be a lot of talk about Trump and Biden, and that's just the way it is. That's the nature of our business. the midterm elections are going to turn on, or the Republicans are going to win the House. So it's a question of how many seats. And that's just off year election for them, weak economy, a lot of stuff, right? No, I haven't heard anybody who is to be taken seriously who doesn't think Republicans are going to at least get a majority. I mean, whether the question is whether they run the table in a big way but they're actually not it's not even like 2010 because they don't have as many seats that they can really realistically win. So the end result may be fabulous for Republicans, but the actual the change, right? The change in seats might not be that big. Senate's going to be very tough, and the Senate's going to be candidate by candidate. And this is what I keep pounding the table about. So to your point about, where do independents, how do they feel? I think a better way maybe of framing it is for our purposes now, what do independents in Georgia think? What do independents in Nevada think, and Pennsylvania and Arizona about the people that they're going to be voting for in those states, specifically on the Senate side, but also on the gubernatorial side? And that's where I hope it is, the results based, and specifically around the issue of how people handle COVID and the economy. And those two things are inextricably linked. Because I think that people need to be held accountable for it.
And Utah, we've had Evan McMullin on the show. We've talked about it. I mean, that I think is maybe the most fascinating race of all to watch, because it's the only example we're going to have of a Trump-supported Republican and then someone who's running as an independent, right? And the Democrats are sitting this one out.
He's running?
Well, he's actually knocking on the door, and he's also a CIA guy. So I know you're being facetious. I know you're being facetious, but I think people are underestimating the surprises, right? Evan McMullin can beat Mike Lee. I'm going to say it. Maybe we'll bet a beer on it or a latte.
Love it. All right, dude, I will take it.
Right? We'll see,
take that bet.
We'll see. We'll see if the turnout happens. We'll see if Democrats. It's a case study. Will Democrats hold their nose and vote for the guy they know used to be a Republican but is not a Trump-supported so here's the GOP
thing,
guy, right? In Mike Lee, not like a moderate, right? He's not a moderate.
I'll say this, and I think this applies to, although honestly I haven't, and now in the serious zone, not trying to be funny, I haven't really followed Evan's stuff in a while. I don't know what he says or thinks about a lot of.
You should have him on. I think that'd be an interesting discussion. You guys should two CIA guys.
Yeah. I'd be fine to have him on. But I mean, I know more about what Kinzinger and Liz Cheney and some of these Republicans. And here's you cannot, and this is true in the pundit space as well, because I've seen people that I've known who used to be very conservative, who now all of a sudden are going on TV to say, yeah, I mean, abortion all 9 months of a pregnancy, like that's totally constitutional, because they've had this reactionary effect to Trump specifically, and Trumpism, whereby they've decided the only way to slow this down is to go play for the other team entirely. And any Republican who crosses over, and I think a lot of them have, into that realm, they're now just considered they're considered either controlled opposition or just outright opposition by the actual base. And I understand that. So I think that's a problem. Trump breaks down people's judgment, even when they have legitimate grievances against some aspect of Trump policy or personality. They go completely crazy, right? I mean, if Trump gives them a little shove in a bar, they go right for grabbing a chair to try to smash it over his head. It's like, if you do that, you're going to get arrested. Right? Like,
and you're taking the bait, because he loves that shit and it propels him. And I think the underestimated, misunderstood power of Trump is very simple. It's fuck you to the man, right? It's not about policy. It's not about specific legislation. In the end, he has always channeled something that is very uniquely American, which is fuck the system. Fuck the system, fuck the man, fuck the rich guys, fuck the people who are screwing us. That's always been a part of American politics, and he has captured it and channeled it in a way that nobody else ever has.
I think that's not only do I think that's true, I mean, I have heard that from so many Trump supporters that I cannot even begin to.
It's true. It's like when you were in high school and kids were, writing on their desk, fuck the world, right? And it's like punk rock. It's something very deep. And he has uniquely channeled that. The Democrats continue to fail to channel that. And, that this is where we are.
Really, the Democrats are the man, Paul. This is what this is why we're going to bring you.
Well, I think you're all
my side. We're going to.
I think you're all the man. And I want to see the whole duopoly implode. And look, I promised you I'd let you out of here. I got one last question that you cannot avoid, one that separates everybody, divides America, very intense. You cannot pick a middle ground. You must pick a side. Buck Sexton, pancakes or waffles?
I have celiac disease, so I can basically eat neither of them in the standard form. But if you're giving me gluten-free, gotta go waffles. More exciting than pancakes. Waffles, Mark. I like the little grooves. I go waffles.
See, this is a question that I'm always glad we ask. It's fascinating. It's divisive. You can test it on your show. Just give me a credit and throw a million or two of your listeners over here. But I hope you'll come back. I appreciate
Absolutely.
the exchange. It's exciting to see your rise, as a student of media and politics. I think it's a really fascinating time. You're in a powerful point. I know you care deeply about your country, and you've served it for a long time. And I feel better about the fact that you're going to help guide that versus a lot of the other alternatives that could be in that chair.
I will take that I'm better than a lot of the alternatives. For your skeptical left of center audience, they should try to help the Bucks.
See, they're not. This is the thing, Buck. They're not left of center. They're none of the above. And I think that's what the Republicans and Democrats are going to find out over time. I hope we can continue the conversation.
And we'll have you on the show sometime too, especially to talk
anytime.
about some of these veteran issues.
Congratulations on the engagement. Because,
Thank you.
Parenthood is coming up, and that will undoubtedly be the hardest mission you've ever undertaken.
Sir.
Thank you, my friend. Stay vigilant.
Take care.